Welcome to the How to Adult podcast, where we learn all things adulting. My name is Travis Walker, and I will be your host. And today's topic is all around leadership. It's all around self-awareness, and it's all about inclusion in that journey. Super powerful episode. We have TEDx speaker Nikki Joyner with us today. Incredible insight into this work. So buckle up and get excited because we're about to learn how to adult. We are back for another episode of How to Adult, and we've got a very special guest today. Nikki Joyner is here. How are you?
Hello, Travis. So good to be here. I'm really excited to chat.
Yes, absolutely. I brought you on specifically to talk about leadership, but leadership through the lens of inclusion. How can we lead in an inclusive manner? And so that's kind of the topic that I want us to look through the lens of today. Does that sound fair?
Love it. That is my bread and butter, jam, sauce, all of it. So it's what I do day in and day out. So it's my passion area. I'm super happy to.
That's awesome. And that's exactly why you're here, because it is your bread and butter, and I can tell. So before we get into the juicy steak of that conversation, I'd like to know a little bit more about you and the work that you do, because on Instagram, I can't tell if you're a rock star or a speaker, because it looks like you're having too much fun. So I need to know more about you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, um, I love that you picked up on that because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, she's high energy. Like, I wonder how she delivers sessions around like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Exactly that. High energy, sharp edges. So that's what you need to know about me as a speaker and consultant is I am high energy and sharp edges, and I maintain true to that. So I got into speaking and consulting around 2015 when I
Yeah.
first realized that people did it in a non-volunteer capacity. I just thought that so many people were volunteering the goodness of their hearts to like do all of this like consulting and presenting because I had been doing it for so many years prior. And
Yeah.
then I realized that people were monetizing it, making a career out of it. And I thought, okay, this sounds good. So I started to think about like, what's my lane? What do I want to do? And I think a lot of people go into being a speaker because they're really passionate about the area that they talk about or they have a lot of knowledge about it. For me, I went into the area I talk about, which is connectedness, belonging, and in inclusion because I made a lot of mistakes as a college student in that area.
Oh,
It was
same.
not yeah, it was not my forte. I talk about it in every single session that I do. So I think as I became an adult and as I started to realize more about this thing we call adulting, that it was actually a lot harder than I anticipated to like invite people to things and include them in the way that it should be done. So I just became a speaker and consultant, particularly with college students starting in 2019 in a paid capacity as like a 1099 contractor is what people
Yeah.
call it. Um, Working with this audience because I was like, I feel like I have a message that is unique. And my differentiator is that I use my own mistakes to help to propel people forward in a way that helps them learn from my mistakes so that they don't have missteps that turn into mistakes.
Yeah.
So that's just a little bit about how I kind of got started. I now in 2024 my gosh, I never thought one, I never thought that I would be a public speaker.
Yeah.
Two, I never thought that I would do it to the volume that I do it. Last year, Travis, I did 70 gigs,
70.
70 gigs with college students about inclusion, connectedness, and belonging. And let me tell you, I learned so much about myself. I learned so
Yeah.
much about business. I learned so much about college students and the craft of speaking in general. So I'm excited to go into 2024. Like I said, right before we have done this call, we are in the thick of conference season. So I've gotten to interact with like thousands of college students. And it's been really cool to maintain consistency amongst the topic that I talk about, even as my life ebbs and flows. So yeah, I'm a speaker and a consultant. I travel around the country, talk to college students and the adults that support them
Yeah.
to talk about all things connectedness, belonging, and helping more people feel like they matter.
That is so that is so cool and such special work because there's meaning behind it, and when applied correctly is incredibly powerful and pushes organizations, especially organizations like Greek organizations, forward. I
Hmm.
think the most diverse team that I've ever worked on was my fraternity board, and I now I kind of reflect on that. I'm like, was that on accident, or was it like, was it on purpose? I have no idea. But I want to zoom out for a moment and get a clear definition of inclusion in the sense of what does inclusion mean to you?
Love it. So, the way that I always talk about this is I think a lot of times people kind of lump in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in a
Yeah,
lot of ways, we just call everything DEI. We just kind of bucket it into this area. So, I love this question because it segments out what I believe to be one of the most important aspects. For me, inclusion is about the action, it's about
yeah,
the behavior. So when we look at like the English language as an example, we have two things that need to happen in a sentence, a noun and a verb. If I just go around shouting sandwich, 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 people are going to be like, what is she selling them? Is she buying them? Is she making them? That verb is inclusion. That
right.
verb is what we do, it's the action. So a lot of times when we talk about our DE&I efforts, folks are just screaming from the rooftops like events, programs, policies, like what are we doing with those things? That is the action. So for me, inclusion is about the action. And that's always how I like to break it down for folks. Now, couple of caveats here.
Yeah.
One, in our society, we do a really good job of being like, we're inclusive. And I believe as the people who are the includers, we don't get to say if people feel included or if they don't.
Oh,
The
wow.
only
Yeah.
person that can say they feel included is the person or people we are attempting to include. So I think that like level of I'm an inclusive person um, is something that I kind of want to like throw out on the expressway going 75 miles an hour because it actually puts the onus on us as the people who are putting the action forward instead of how people are receiving it. So we know that in the world, how we give into the world is just as important as how people receive it, right? So people follow people who they trust, who are credible, who are relatable. And the only way that we're able to do that is by centering the people in what we do. So I would say that is definitely the caveat around inclusion. And I see a lot of people swing and miss around that, myself included. So sometimes I'm like, oh, like I'm an inclusive professional speaker, and I'm like, no, Nikki, no, you're an inclusion speaker. You talk about inclusion. You don't get to say that you're inclusive. So sometimes I got to check my own self, right? But yeah,
That's
for
awesome.
me, at baseline level, I think inclusion is about the action and the actions that we take to help more people feel like they matter.
I love your response, particularly the point about the only people that get to decide if they have been included is the group or the people that we're talking about, right? You can
Hmm.
invite your friend to the bar, and technically you have been inclusive in that action. However, if they work nights, you haven't really included them at all because you've
Right.
invited them to something that you know that they cannot attend. Uh,
Mm.
is that a reasonable example of what we're talking about?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I one of the slides that I normally use when I talk with students is it's not inclusion if you're inviting people into a space you're unwilling to change.
Ooh,
You're just being nice. So I started using that about a year and a half ago, and then I got this email that came across my email box, and it was like, "Hey, you want to do a TEDx talk? I think this would be so great." So I started applying for them. I finally got one, and I did a TEDx talk on exactly that topic about
wow.
how inviting people to things and including people in things are two different things. So that experience that you just gave is something that we're often like, "Well, I tried." Well, you were just
Yeah,
being nice. You're not being
yeah.
inclusive.
Wow. That's incredible. And we've got a TEDx speaker on the podcast. We are
Yes!
making it in the world. Oh my God.
Yes, but it was a fun experience. It was a fun experience. I learned a lot about myself, and I actually hired a speaking coach, and
Oh
he
wow.
helped me a lot with my message to help it resonate with more people. So shout out to Caesar if you're watching this, Caesar. But yeah, it was an awesome experience. I would 12 out of 10 recommend to anyone.
Oh my gosh. That we've got to talk more about that.
Yes.
Pathetic. Because I want to know more about how you became passionate about this topic of inclusion before we start into kind of the leadership aspect.
Mm.
I'd like to know how you got passionate about this topic before we jump in there.
I love that question. I think for me, connectedness to people has always been innate. Like I've always loved to connect with other people and love to build relationships with other people. As a young kid, I was very inquisitive. So
Yeah.
like I was the child that was asking my parents questions that they're like, "Oh gosh, I knew this day would come." And my questions were around like I remember specifically my parents would never let me watch MTV. They were like, "You cannot watch that, et cetera, et cetera." I was like, "Okay, fine." So then I was telling my friends at school, "My mom will let me watch the MTV channel." And they were like, "You can watch BET. It's not MTV." And I was like, "Okay." So I came home and I was watching BET instead. And my parents were like, what is this? Like, what is the BET? And I was like, "I don't know, mom, but it's just something that I want to watch." And she was like, "What is Black entertainment television?" And I was like, "Well, why do we need Black entertainment television?" And my mom in the corner is like, "I don't even know how to answer this to you."
Yeah.
And then those types of questions, continuously asking, "Mom, like, why do my friends from school have to take the bus up here?" No answer, no
Yeah.
response. Like, just an inquisitive kid to then when the internet was not dial up, because for me in school, the internet you had to plug into the phone line. Okay. So like I couldn't always use it. When that became not a thing, I started searching my questions that I would ask my parents. Why
Yeah.
does Black entertainment television exist? Why do
Wow.
people take the bus up to school? And then I would get responses. I start reading and I'm like, oh, okay. But the life that I lived, I never saw any of that. I never experienced it. So when I went to college, my world got flipped upside down.
Right.
And I began to realize that while I have been set up for success, not everybody around me has been set up for success in the same way. And I
Right.
think that is really what drove me because I had always found an innate connection with people. I wanted people to live their best lives the way that I was living my best life. And when I realized that that was not the case, I began to get more inquisitive and in some cases louder about this stuff.
Oh wow.
Um, because of the identities that I hold, I found that people listened to me, or at least they would be
Yeah.
willing to hear me out. So I use that. I use the privileges and the positionality that I have on a day in and day out. But for me, I became passionate about it when I realized that it was an issue.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think I really firmly realized it was an issue until I was like 18 or 19 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. That's an incredible story. Um, but I would like to bring the leadership into this conversation about inclusion. Okay.
Mm,
So how do you think about the relationship between leadership and inclusion? So there is a relationship. I know there is.
absolutely.
How do you think about that relationship between those two words?
Yes, I think it's everything. For me, it boils down to positionality. As leaders, whether we're leaders in our student organization, on our club basketball team, in at Starbucks as a
Yeah.
barista, whatever it is, like we have leadership roles in our life that are formal and informal. So some of the ones I just named are like formal leadership positions where people are coming to us and we have authority. A lot of us also have informal leadership roles in our
Okay.
friendship circles, like in at work. A lot of us have social capital that we use and people look to us. It's commonly referred to in research as like referent power, meaning people follow us, people work with us, people are more likely to buy into what we have to say because they find us relatable and credible. So
Yeah.
all of us have some sort of leadership role in some way, shape, or form, even down to our families. Like
Yeah.
if you're an older sibling, if you're a parent or guardian, like you have a leadership role. So I think as we think about whatever your leadership role is, dissecting that and figuring out like what's your positionality, your primary goal, I believe, as an individual should be to make more people feel like they matter. Because when more people feel like they matter, when more people feel included, they are more likely to reach their fullest potential. And if you're listening to the podcast, or even you, Travis, like the last time that you were able to reach your fullest potential in something, whether it was like class project, work project, the last podcast episode that you put together, like you feel real good about that.
Yeah.
You feel real good about that. And the more that we can do that for more people, specifically people who don't look like us, who don't have the same experiences as us, the better life we're all going to have. So there was this quote that someone said to me last week, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm into that. It was like, a rising tide lifts all ships, or lifts all boats.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times when we think about the correlation between who rises the tide, it's the leaders. The leaders rise the tide. And thinking about ways that we can leverage that, our positionality, our power, different types of power that we have, to kind of shake up the game and level the playing field, for me, is really what it's all about.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And so thinking about leveling the playing field or bringing all boats up with the tide, why should leaders be thinking about this in a way that they want to actively pursue? I want to I want to raise all the boats with the tide that I know that I can create. And so why should people actively be seeking that action out?
Yes, love it. So there's a ton of research that shows that more diverse teams are more productive, they're more innovative, they create better sense of belonging. But when we think about diversity, that's really like the baseline level. What this research shows is when people of different lived experiences are in teams where they feel included, then that's where that innovation, that productivity comes to play. So when we think about the ways in which people engage with other people, I am likely to be most connected to other white middle class women, because we have a lot of similar lived experiences. If I were to go in the elevator and there's 6 or 7 people in the elevator, I am probably most likely to talk to the person who looks like me, because I'm like, I feel some sort of sense of connection, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. But when we don't prioritize inclusion of different people, and we take that out of the elevator setting and into the work setting, into the classroom setting, then it becomes, I'm only ever getting knowledge, wisdom, experience from people who live life the same way that I do. So to my point, before I went to college, like, I didn't know, like, that people experience the world differently than me. I thought everybody's parents got them a credit card at age 17. I thought that's what you just did, right?
Sure.
So the ways in which that comes forth, particularly around decision making. How do we make decisions in teams? How do we set policy in teams? How do we set due dates for school, for class projects? Like, all the way down to those things. Thinking about the ways in which we do that, for me, people should care about it, because it helps to elevate us all, and it makes us more well-rounded human beings. Like, I'm not a sports person, but my husband Adam is a huge sports person. And one of the things that him and I were talking about, and he was like, wow, that's a really good analogy, is like, if I was on a team and I was the quarterback, and I only ever practiced with other quarterbacks, when it came game time, I would not be as good as I need to be, because I was only ever around people who knew exactly what I knew. But when I start throwing in the running back, when I start throwing in the tight end, all of these things, then it becomes, I understand how these things interwork with one another, and I can play the game more effectively. So taking that out into a different setting, like, we have to care about this, because if we don't, we're only ever going to be screaming into an echo chamber for forever. And that's not helpful.
That's a great, I love the sports analogy. I thought that was really good. So shout out to Adam.
Yes, shout out to Adam.
That's awesome. And even jumping back to the beginning of the episode, I had mentioned that the most diverse team that I've ever been on was the executive board of my fraternity. And I don't know if that was on accident or if that was designed. But I bring that back up because of my next question. How does self-awareness play into this conversation around leading and inclusion. Like, I wasn't self-aware at the time that I was on a very diverse team, but
Mm,
I wonder if it would have been more powerful if I was aware in the time that I'm on a diverse team and lean into that.
mm. That's such a good question. A lot of times, especially in the climate that we're in right now, the DEI landscape, people like run away from it quickly, might I add.
Sure.
So I've actually shifted some of my topics in the college market to be self-awareness. So
Oh,
I
wow.
love this question because inclusion is all about self-awareness. And when we are not inclusive, we tend to take up more space than we realize we're taking up. Now, if I was standing up, you would see I'm a whopping 5 foot nothing. I weigh about 125 pounds. Okay. Sister friend is short and slim, but I can take up a lot of space in a room metaphorically
Right.
when I am talking over people, when
Mhm,
I am giving ideas that have already been given and not giving credit.
mhm,
I can take up a lot of space when I'm only talking from my experience, my lived experience, and not entertaining or working with people who have different lived experiences than me. So I
mhm.
think, as we think about self-awareness, it's all about like how much space do you take up? And as a small human physically, I have been in spaces where I take up a lot of space emotionally and mentally for other people because I'm not self aware. Example, when I was a
Right.
new member, when I was a new member of my organization, I came to the second new member meeting and they were talking about the dues. And I just wanted friends, like I just wanted friends. I wanted to fit in. And sometimes when we do that, we like blurt things out, we like word vomit. I don't know if you've been in that situation, but
Oh,
I'm just like,
sure.
"Bleh," like I'm just like, I don't know. And I remember specifically being in that meeting and them talking about the dues, and then they gave us a break. And I was like, oh, perfect. Like, and making small talk with the new member educator. Like, I'm happy to write you a check now. Like $500 is like totally reasonable. It's like super, super cheap. And then I noticed that other members of the new member class were kind of like gravitating away from me, starting conversations with other people, not talking to me. And I kind of felt like isolated, alone on this island. Like, did I say something that like
Yeah.
offset people? Like, did I say something? Because in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm just being nice. Like, I'm just being like, oh, I'll give you your check now. Like, absolutely. Like, it's only $500. It's not a big deal. And after the third new member meeting, somebody pulled me aside and they were like, hey, like I think the comment that you made about the dues like was kind of off-putting to some people because before you got here, people were talking about how they were worried about being able to pay for that.
Oh, wow.
And then you just got really loud about it. And I know you didn't mean anything by it, but I think that's why people are distancing themselves from you. In
Wow.
that moment, I was like, man, Nikki, you really know how to suck the air out of a room, don't you? And I wasn't doing it to be mean. I thought that
Sure.
I was doing it to be like a super great follower and like, oh my
Yeah.
God, let me write the check for you right now. That's not how it works, right? So I think self-awareness is super key because we can take up way too much space. We can suck the air out of a room really easily when we don't do that. And most importantly, when we take up a lot of space, when we suck the air out of rooms, we lose trust from people, and
Wow.
specifically people who don't look like us, people who don't have the same lived experiences as us. And that is why I think in a lot of spaces you see mistrust from the jump. You see people in our country that like you see black people that don't trust white people from the jump. That's
Sure.
why. Because they've been in too many spaces where white people are sucking the air out of the room, i.e., maybe me, I don't know. So thinking about that and being really intentional about it, self-awareness for me is everything. The more
Yeah.
self-aware you can be, the better output you can have. And sometimes the output is, I know I'm in the wrong here and I just need to sit in it. And I think that's why a lot of us don't lean into self-awareness for these types of efforts or anything, is because when we realize we have to sit in our own mess, it like makes us uncomfortable. Um,
Yeah.
but I have really built my whole speaking career on like, this is my mess. And like, let's try to be better about it together. Let's learn from my mistakes together. So I would say self-awareness is honestly the number one skill. I would say if I had to put a skill on what inclusive leaders need or don't need, it is self awareness. Number one.
That's incredible. As you speak, I get curious in the sense of, do you have to make a mess to enter a space of self awareness, or is there a path to be self aware in how you are including people as we kind of navigate through life?
Mm.
Make the mess first and get burned so that you can really understand this idea of self awareness and inclusion.
Yes. So to answer your question, I don't think you need to make a mess. But when I say mess, I'm really referring to choice.
Okay.
And I read this excellent book by Daniel Kahn called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in the book, I learned that there's about 35,000 decisions the average human being makes on a daily basis.
Wow.
That's a lot of decisions. Now,
Too many.
most of them are too many, right? Most of them are made with our system one brain, which is like implicit decisions. So those are things that we do on a day in and day out basis, like brush my teeth, wash my face, take a shower, or do I wash my face, brush my teeth, and then take a shower? Just like those really implicit things that
Yeah.
become routine. Most of us, when we make hiccups, I'll call them, or missteps in those areas, we don't think of them as a mess because they
Yeah.
just go so quickly. But sometimes those hiccups lead to routines that cause bigger messes.
Okay.
And in my case, in my TEDx talk, I talk about like um, how the way I was socialized to know and understand what inclusion was. I did all of those things and I like caused a lot of harm as a result of it. So to directly answer your question, no, I don't think that we need to be in a mess or sit in a mess in order to become more self-aware. But I think that there needs to be some sort of turning point in our lives where we need to put a mirror up to say like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Or
Yeah.
like, I think this feels icky or feels wrong. And most of us, I would say, do that internally. It never becomes external. So I think
Okay.
it can happen internally or externally, but it is a continuous process. So for me, I talk a lot about what happened when I was a college student. Like I'm 33 now, and there was issues. I mean, an issue that I had as early as last week where I was like, that wasn't good, Nick. Like, you gotta be more self-aware around those things, and in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I think just an ever-growing, ever-learning process, but being committed to that, and okay with whatever comes out of it, I think is so, so vital.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. That's so good. It's what this podcast is here for. It's what I really care about in the sense of we don't know what we're doing, but we're trying
Mhm.
to learn how to. And so once you see that mess or you see that mistake, it's up to you to figure out, okay, how am I going to move forward and try to not make this mistake again?
Yep,
That's so
exactly.
powerful. That's so powerful. And so we kind of have alluded to this, but I want to ask it directly in the sense of why should leaders want to be an inclusive leader over any other leadership style that there is? Why should we want to be an inclusive leader?
Yes. So I think that inclusive leadership is best when it's paired with something else, like a
Okay.
glass of wine, as an
Oh,
example. So
it's a great
if,
example.
yes, it's a great example. Like there are people that have created their whole lives around figuring out what wine goes with what food. I believe that inclusive leadership is like the wine in our lives. It needs and is best paired with something else. So for some people, they have a more laid back, laissez faire type of style. So the laissez faire leadership style would be paired with inclusive leadership.
Okay.
For folks that are more situational and are like really good coaches, like have really good push and pull skills, they may want to pair inclusive leadership with like a coaching leadership style or a situationally based leadership style. There's tons of examples, right? But as we think about why people should want to choose this, I think they should want to choose it as a foundation to something else. Too often I work with students that are like, I'm not a relationship builder, Nikki. And like, because I'm not a relationship builder, I don't see myself in this inclusive leadership stuff. And I
Yeah.
think there's 50 ways to get to the same place. So we need to be really cognizant about how does the inclusive leadership style fit into our persona, our personality, our skill set. And it's going to look different for different people. So I would actually say with like this small caveat that inclusive leadership is best as a foundation, where something else is added on in a way that makes it feel really genuine for the person,
Yeah.
so that we can kind of pull from both things. There is a lot of research right now being done around taking, for example, taking like DE&I efforts and moving them out of HR, moving them out
Yeah.
of education into like its own thing. So I use that as a way to correlate the research with like people are seeing that DEI needs to be a standalone foundation for everything else. It doesn't need to sit in something. So I would say leadership style, leadership attributes, leadership persona for me would be the same.
Yeah.
So figure out what is your glass of choice, if that's if the Pepsi, the wine, whatever it is, and how can you marry it with something else for it to make meaning for you.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
yeah, too often I just think that there's a lot of people that are like, well, you have to be inclusive, and people are like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Like it's unclear how I do that. Using it as a foundation, kind of like the crust in a pie, for lack of a better term, and filling that pie with whatever makes sense for you.
Yeah. Find the wine to your cheese.
Yes. Yep. Hmm.
That's really awesome. You brought up a few times the work that's happening within DEI, and I think I've seen comment on this happening in our society. There's a drawback from companies and institutions in their DEI work happening right now. How do you think about that, and why do you think that is so?
Yes. So this is going to be the part in the podcast where either people are going to start to turn it up and listen and really vibe with me, or they're going to check off. So I want to acknowledge that before I start speaking, and I hope that you don't lose any followers from this. But um, here's the tea. Here's the real deal.
Okay.
Is this is DEI has become politicized. It's not political. It's become way too politicized in our environment, in our market, in our governments, in a way where people are weaponizing it. And
Okay.
when I say people, I mean politicians specifically. So when we have laws that are being put in place in places like Florida, Texas, Iowa, Missouri, Alabama, where like colleges and universities can't use federal funding for DE&I. Like people are getting their jobs cut. Like whole entire multicultural affairs offices gone.
Uh-huh.
Um, I saw a picture the other day at UT Austin, and they just put duct tape over the multicultural affairs name on the big student center sign because they closed the office.
Wow.
So like we are in a space right now where we have a selected few people who, might I add, are the same people in the elevator talking to each other because they
Right.
all look the same, they all come from the same experience, and they are dictating for the rest of the world on what's happening, what should happen, and who should control what. So I think that's the first reason is there's people are getting involved in things that they have no business getting involved in, and they're trying to regulate things that should not be regulated by the entity in which they're in, i.e. the government. I feel extremely strong about that. Now there are policies and procedures that have been put in place to account for inequity, and what's happened is now that we are seeing a more even distribution of our playing field, by no means are we there, but we are seeing a more even distribution than what has been in years past for things um, affirmative action, Roe v. Wade. Those things were put in place so that we could offset the balance. Now we're seeing politicians going back saying, "Ha, just kidding. Like you've had your time, you're good." And I think for a lot of people, that's what's causing people to pull back. That's what's causing companies to pull back, organizations to pull back on the work, because they don't want to lose relatability with their audience by engaging in it. Because now our
Hmm.
politicians have said it's bad, they've demonized it. And most importantly, I think demonized it incorrectly. There's been a lot of
Interesting.
conversations about like critical race theory, or CRT is what people refer to it as, and why we shouldn't be teaching CRT in schools. Or and I'm like, no elementary school is teaching critical race theory. Like I don't know what kind of weird reality you live in, but like we're not teaching critical race theory. We're talking about history. And I don't
Yeah.
know if you've seen Trevor Noah's documentary. He came out, it was like a stand up. He did his most recent stand up, and I loved it so much because he called out the United States in a way that was like, y'all, I go to other countries and people take ownership of their ish. Like we hide it. We try to hide
Yeah.
it. And then we put rules in place to gaslight and weaponize what already happened. Like it just feels raunchy and not rad. So I think that's why people are pulling back. It's because it's been too politicized. It's
It's
been too politicized and it's polarizing as a result. And people feel like they need to pick a side. And DEI is really just about giving everyone the opportunity to reach their fullest potential. And when we don't do that, we lose the humanness that we are.
Yeah, that's a really good. That it's an interesting response overall. And before my current role, I was teaching U.S. history to eighth graders, and
Okay.
yeah, and then I was in my last year, I was teaching African American ethnic studies, and we were actually bringing that course to the district for the first time, and I was helping write the curriculum, and people thought that we were putting in together curriculum that was critical race theory. And I was like, no, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I was teaching it because nobody else would, to be clear. And what we were doing was we were studying history, we were studying current events, and how it was tailored and how it was impacted by African American influence.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people got that confused, and I think it goes back to a lot of the things that you're mentioning in your response. So interesting overall. Interesting. Anything on my kind of connection to what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think your notion about like confused makes me uncomfortable, right? So
Okay.
like if I'm confused, I'm uncomfortable and that's why I don't like it. Not me, right? But like as an individual human being, when I am confused about, in your case, like you teaching this course and people being like, well, I'm confused about what this is, I'm automatically uncomfortable about it. And
Okay.
we have correlated directly, like I'm confused and I'm uncomfortable. So now in turn, that must mean it's bad. And
Oh,
instead of someone talking to you and following up to ask clarifying questions about, like, what do you teach in the course, Travis? Like, what do
yeah.
you talk about in this course? It's just like, oh no, it's bad. We shouldn't be talking about this. It needs to go. And then all of a sudden, people are writing legislators about how Travis Walker is teaching CRT in his course and he's awful. And it's like, wait, I'm sorry, how did we get here?
How do how
how,
did we get here?
how did we get here? And it's because people feel threatened.
Right.
People feel threatened because I think for a lot of years, many years, there has been a small population of people reaping a large part of benefit. And now that we're trying to like try to move that around a little bit, true IKEA fashion, people are like, oh no, that must be wrong. And it's like, is it wrong or exactly to what you said? Are you just uncomfortable?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I love to hear how people respond to my words. Um, so just to close out, I'd love to hear a little bit how you coach people in the sense of when you're educating leaders on this topic of leading in an inclusive fashion. What are maybe two or three things that you hope that they take away? These are mandatory things that you must understand in
Mm,
the topic.
that's a really, really good question. The first one in every single one of my sessions is that um, there is a difference between being nice and being inclusive.
Yeah.
And just because you're nice doesn't mean you're inclusive. That's the number one thing. That is like I have stickers that say that. Like it is
That.
the number one thing I want people to take away. Um, Number two, I would say self-awareness. So I was like super glad that we got a chance to talk about that and like you kind of weave that into this because self-awareness is the starting point to an inclusive leadership journey. And we
Yeah.
have to prioritize it in a way that's meaningful. And then the third one I think is acknowledgement. Like we have to acknowledge that right now our world is not set up for everyone to be successful. Some people refer to these as like we have to acknowledge oppression. We have to acknowledge systemic inequity. We have to acknowledge behavioral inequity. Like lots of I think kind of high profile words that sometimes if people are listening to this podcast, they're like, I have no idea what this lady's talking about. We just have to acknowledge. Google one of them. Okay. That's my take for you. Google one. But we have to acknowledge. And that's what I really want people to take away from my sessions is that we have to acknowledge. And I think for a lot of us, we have to acknowledge the interworkings in our own lives. We have
Sure.
to acknowledge the positionality in our own lives. We have to acknowledge the things that we see or sometimes don't see in our own lives. And most importantly, why that is.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say the number one thing is inclusion is about more than just being nice.
Wow.
But we also have to acknowledge and we have to work through those things in a way that's going to be meaningful to us and the people around us.
That's very interesting. I think that you've given us a lot to chew on, a lot to think about as we're trying to figure out how to adult and how to lead, and a lot of things, good things to think about. So thank you for that. If
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, if people want to learn more about you and more about the work that you're doing, where should they go?
Yes, NikkiJoyner.com. Plain, simple, easy. You
Yeah.
can find me at NikkiJoyner.com. I'm also on all social media. So if you search Nikki Joyner, it'll pull up. Um, I would say in my website, you're going to find a lot of the work that I do. So if you're interested in like working with me in like a business capacity, that would be where I would encourage you to go. If you're a college student or an administrator and you're looking for like tips, tricks, things to consider, stuff to chew on, you should go to my Instagram
Yeah.
because I do a lot of reels. I do a lot of resharing things on there. I do a lot of like, and today we're going live to talk about this thing. So if you're looking for like more real time content, I would definitely recommend Instagram. And if you're interested in any sort of like scholarly work, I would go to my LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time trying to reshare things from other practitioners in the industry and helping to elevate voices of people who are writing articles, writing books. That's just not my strong suit, but there's a lot of really talented people in the world that are doing that. So I would recommend LinkedIn for folks that are like, I'd like to chew on some of the things that you talked about in a more like scholarly capacity.
Yeah.
LinkedIn would be a great place to find me there.
That's incredible. Well, y'all go check out Nikki and all of her stuff. Like I said, if you check out her Instagram, she looks like a rock star. So get it, get excited for that. And remember, we are going to learn how to adult together. Thank you so much to Nikki for coming on the show and helping us all learn how to adult. To stay up to date on all things How to Adult, make sure that you follow at How to Adult TW on Instagram and Facebook. And remember, we are going to learn how to adult together. See you next time.